Hey, everybody. Welcome to our new podcast series called Athena and the Stag. The name of this podcast is actually a double entendre. For those of you who like Greek mythology, you'll know that Athena is the Greek goddess of wisdom and paradoxically also of strategic warfare. Whereas the stag in Greek mythology seems to just regularly get injured or killed recklessly. For those of you who, like us, also attended Claremont McKenna College, you get the reference as referencing our college's mascots. But I am actually sitting here with a real life person named Athena. Actually, the only Claremont student ever named Athena, as far as we can tell. Um, Athena has been an intern for Ocampo Capital for the past 2 years and has witnessed our growth and evolution really from kind of the real outset of the firm to what it is today. Um, and over the past couple of years, Athena and I have had a lot of conversations about consumer. And we thought that some of these conversations might be interesting to share with you in this podcast series, and specifically kind of how we debate on consumer venture investing from two different perspectives. Athena's being a 21-year-old college senior, looking at consumer investing through the eyes of a Gen Z female, kind of taking an academic and theoretical perspective. I, on the other hand, look at consumer investing through the eyes of a Gen X former merchant and current general partner of Ocampo Capital, which invests in early state consumable businesses. And this is our first episode, like I mentioned. It's an ongoing debate of a kind of that Athena and I have had several times about the relative importance of product quality versus disruptive branding. Athena is going to kick off this conversation kind of from an academic standpoint, sharing some of her research. I will then invariably jump in with my kind of perspectives on the topic, and we'll leave it up to you as a listener to determine if Gen X or Gen Z is more persuasive, and if the outcomes from Greek mythology of the Stag and the Athena hold up in 2025. So with that, Athena, take it away.
The stakes are high. The stakes are generational. Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, okay, like Carl mentioned, that we're basically thinking about brand or founder-led narratives and their significance in product success, I think, over the course of the past 2 years. So last summer, I did a paper where I emphasized the importance of founder-led stories and brand identity, specifically in the beauty market. I made a note about how like quiet beauty trend, which initially was just a simple demand for proof of effectiveness, now has matured into a more potent and widespread sentiment of value consciousness, and is especially important for a space like beauty where, effectiveness might not be upfront. Some of the data that I looked into involves McKinsey finding 54% of beauty executive now consider the consumer skepticism in the single greatest risk to future growth. Um, so what it seems to suggest to me is that product quality and efficacy have definitely replaced founder-led narratives as primary purchase drivers, which makes me wonder what are the significance of founder-led narratives in the consumer industry nowadays, and why is it that people started paying attention to such narratives in relations to product efficiency? So the way I thought this would go would be we can talk about a few brands that I looked into, and then also we can do a deep dive into some of the case studies that Carl has lived through. But let me give a working thesis. Founder slash brand story would be a trust primer, but it's definitely not a substitute for efficacy. And some of the narratives of like brand slash founders could potentially also backfire, which I think I will talk more about the underdog effect, which I think like is also a very, very trendy academic topic in the field of psychology. Because I was talking to one of my friend who researched in behavioral psych yesterday, and he said, "Wow, the narrative story is actually a big heated topic." So yeah, what's your initial reaction to this?
My initial reaction to it is I understand it's a hot topic right now. I also believe that it is a pendulum that swings back and forth. I tend to believe, as having been a history major, that kind of to paraphrase Harry S. Truman, the only thing new is the history you don't know. And over the course of history, if you look at storytelling has always been part of developing brand identities. And it is, I think, and it always will. I think there is sometimes a pendulum towards, brand effectiveness and those kinds of things as sort of determinants that the brand is good. But I will also say that historically, trust was defined a lot by the storytelling. And so if you go back hundreds of years, trust was defined by how the story was told. And that continues to be the case today, whether it's the underdog effect, whether it's good versus evil, whether it's the customer as a hero. Those have all been themes in literature and in branding for hundreds of years. So I do think it is like the pendulum swinging back to your point, but I think it's something that's been around a long time.
Oh. Yeah, I guess it has been. But would you agree with me in terms of like the general thesis that I put out, as in like compared to like 2024 summer, where I was only seeing like a simple trend, now it has more of a significance in, I guess, like the context of consumer in 2025.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that at all.
Mhm. That's great. Well, yes. And I think I can talk a little bit more about the specific literature. The Journal of Consumer Research has a really interesting piece about the underdog effect. It basically suggests that founder or brand-led narrative function as a persuasion formats rather than like about us page on their website. Um, the researcher Pahari introduced the underdog brand biology, or a story that emphasized the humble origins, lack of resources, and determined struggle against the odds. In that show, there's an increase in the face of these type of narrative when it comes to purchase intentions, real choice, and brand loyalty. And I was wondering in what categories these stay true and which ones, the underdog effect might backfire.
Yeah, I was just writing down the same thing. Like I have to believe it differs from category to category. I have to believe, you think about like where underdogs have been really effective. Think of like Under Armour. Under Armour was an underdog taking on Nike, and that proved really effective. Um, I think if you're an underdog in a category that's very science driven, may not be so effective. Like I can't think of any specific examples right now, but I would think like our science is worse, but we're an underdog. Probably is not that persuasive an argument. Whereas it probably is in more sort of trend driven or non-scientific categories, I would think.
I see. And what about as an investor, like when you look at these brand narratives or like a founder come to you with their backstory, which I know you care a lot about.
I think brand stories are important as it relates to determining, how good the founders are. I think the brand story can be very persuasive in helping to get the consumer to understand and buy into the product or believe in the product. Um, just think about like professional sports teams and all the storytelling around their founding and the way they become such a big team like they are now. A lot of that is really persuasive. And if you look at things like branding and a lot of storytelling, it for brands takes a lot of pages actually from like wartime propaganda. It's
Hmm.
provocative, it's disruptive, it creates curiosity, sometimes it creates shock. But what it does is it gets people to act and it gets people to have an emotional response, and that matters a lot in branding. Now, when you think that's one thing to think about, but as you know, when I think about investing, the story matters, but the product matters, in my opinion, just as much, if not more. Like the product quality really matters a lot. And specifically, I tend to think about like the four P's: product, price, place, promotion, which that framework was kind of popularized by a guy named Philip Kotler, who's a professor from the business school I went to. When I think about that and think about sort of brand storytelling, product and price are like a rocket, like the rocket ship. You're building the rocket ship, and that's the product. Placement and promotion in many ways are kind of like the rocket fuel. Can in placing it the right place and promoting it correctly, you can accelerate a brand's growth for sure. But
Yeah.
you need the rocket. If you don't have the rocket, you have nothing. You just have like a bunch of combustible fuel. But you need both because your rocket is not going to go very far. So I think about that a lot. So think about the product itself and the product quality attributes and the efficacy and all that. That's super important. But
Yeah.
then you also have to think about the storytelling and how the story has to reinforce the rocket and support and propel the rocket.
Yeah. Huh. I don't know. I mean, like, this is kind of a observation just on my own, and it's not statistically tested, but like, I feel like living in LA for like the past 2 years really opened my eyes to some like absolutely useless products, but with really good storytelling that are able to like sell a lot.
Yep.
Um, yeah, I mean, like I threw this example in one of my economic seminar recently. Everyone hated it. I was talking about Labubu. Are you familiar with Labubus?
Even though I'm Gen X, I'm familiar with Labubu.
Right. So think about Labubus, right? I mean, like Potmar has long have these blind boxes and things for people to collect. This type of products, they don't have any inherent value. It's more like a social recognition or like a rush of dopamine. What differentiates Labubu from like all of the other blind boxes and then cute, like, characters that they have out there? Like, I think a lot of it is because of this successful marketing slash branding. And it has like a lot to do with like the culture of the market that we're looking into selling into as well. I mean, like, oh God, LA is just such a fascinating case study. I feel like if you have a cool story behind any product, you're not only sell, but sell at a premium. Yeah, so like,
Maybe.
oh, okay.
I don't disagree with you, but what I'd say is I think you also have survivorship bias. You're
Mm,
seeing the brands that were successful. Think of all the attempted brands that had no product. The product was nothing good, but it was all brand marketing. How many have failed? Really, you're looking at the lucky brands. I mean, Labubu is not a better quality product than hundreds and hundreds of other things out there. They just hit the right trend at the right time and frankly got lucky, in my opinion.
yeah. Wow, and we're gonna do a whole nother episode on luck versus skill. That's interesting. Well, I mean, like, I guess like going back to like the product quality, I guess on the flip side of the coin, I do think that if you have like a really good quality product and you're not able to tell your story or like get your selling point out there, there's no way people find out about it.
100% agree, and that's something I think about a lot because, as we tend to lean in on products that we believe have really strong differentiated IP or very strong product attributes, but you have to be able to tell the story. If the product is the greatest product ever created but no one knows about it, that doesn't get you very far.
Mhm.
Hence the need, like I was saying, or using the analogy of rocket fuel versus a rocket. Like, you really need the fuel, no question, and the story is clearly a big part of that.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. I guess we're pretty much on the same page about having to have both. What I was trying to say is that people weigh um the product quality more, more so than the brand identity and whatnot. And I'm thinking about it actually in relations to AI. Like an age of AI, there are a lot of cheap, fake stories and medias, but some of them are really clever. But I think like just like my own prediction, I've been curious about like how to create a narrative that is actually attractive. And I think authenticity is like a great part of it. It's surprising to me that like wow, like especially for like beauty, when product quality and the measurement of it cannot be immediate, how do consumers like make decisions in your experience?
I think I may not be answering your question directly, but I think that there is I think you're talking about AI as sort of the platform for inauthenticity. I think there have been inauthentic salespeople,
That's
for
true.
years and years and years. Like, just think about like the term snake oil salesman. It's an inauthentic, product salesperson going back over 100 years, or frequently or more recently, social media influencers. Like, I think you have to have the right social media influencer that's authentic and credible for the brand that's being hawked. If it's not the right influencer, then it may or may not work. But I mean, tell me how is any different, like a inauthentic social media influencer, how that's any different from a snake oil salesperson versus like a bunch of BS on AI. I mean, to me, it's all basically the same thing. I don't know if
That's
you'd agree with
true.
that.
Yeah, I do. I do. I think like the narrative theory, the idea of a transportation. Transportation was proposed as a mechanism whereby narratives can affect belief, defined as absorption into a story, entailing imagery, effect, and attention. And then Green and Brook in 2000, like this is the paper that I was reading, stories and their ability to transport their audience constitute a central part of human life and the consumer experience.
Okay, so you're saying like the ability to be like psychologically transported to in some sort of a human state where you're really excited about wanting to buy this product that can't be done by a non-human. You're saying,
Yeah.
huh. Do you think that'll change in the next few years?
I think it will. I think it will. And I think like I hope that human nature draws like human into conversations with other humans instead of an AI bot, especially when it comes to like, emotional experience that we're trying to pursue.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming over time AI is going to get more and more effective at mimicking, human behavior and anticipating what is going to cause humans to, love or hate something. I mean, just look at music. AI can create music that's can have the same sort of emotional impact in humans as a human can, and that's based on the types of chord progressions and using major versus minor chords, things like that. Why could they not do the same thing when it comes to pulling on your heartstrings for
Mhm.
products that you might want to buy? I don't know. To me, that's coming for sure.
Yeah. Well, have you seen any inauthentic brands?
Have I?
Hmm.
Oh yeah,
Oh.
yeah, millions or thousands or whatever. I mean, yeah, haven't we all?
Yeah, I mean, yes, but I guess like your pair of eyes and in your system of judgment, like how do you see through them? Is it just like pattern
Yeah.
recognition or?
No, I'd say it's a couple things. One is like I think I think a big sign of if a brand is inauthentic, if the brand itself, the product is inauthentic, is product market fit. Like if the product does not fit the market, is something that's not authentically resonating, right?
Uh-huh.
I think if you're thinking about inauthentic branding, that's all over the place, and it can be having inauthentic spokesperson, as a social influencer. It can happen a lot of ways, and that also leads to um, pretty poor product market fit and pretty poor kind of sales ramp. You can see inauthenticity in the product creation itself, and you can see inauthenticity in the way it's marketed or articulated as well. I do agree with you that I think authenticity is going to become more and more important over time, because I think people will be able to more quickly see through kind of garbage. If there's anything that is true about sort of what's happened with social media is, and frankly AI, is it's made um, the attempts to kind of fleece consumers harder to do because you just have a lot more information that's immediately at your fingertips and you can see through it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think the half life of sort of inauthentic brands with inauthentic marketing, being able to like make a go of it, is going to get shorter and shorter, just because with technology we're getting more information faster and faster, and they can kind of determine inauthenticity faster.
But I would also argue that like sometimes in the market, the consumers don't have perfect information, and particularly they don't seek out perfect information. Is that have you ever seen any brands that are just like horrible product quality, but then able to take off and also make sales? And how long did that last?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's you could debate Labubu, but that's one example. I'll give you another example. The pet rock. In the 1970s and early 80s, there was something called the pet rock. It was literally a rock in a box being sold in stores, and it that like was the coolest thing to buy for a while. Do not ask me why. There was no quality to it. It was just a rock in a box, but it
Yeah.
it worked, so it goes right back to like, it was a phenomenon because of the branding. I think it also highlights, to your earlier point, humans are not always like rational economic actors, and and so you have things that are like, whether it's dopamine or whether it's just like, keeping up with the Joneses or whatever. People just get irrational sometimes when it comes to product purchases. You could say the same thing for like financial purchases. When a bunch of investors are chasing other investors, and you get way out of whack with like price versus value on like a stock or on a private company during the econ bubble and things like that, that can get hysterical before it comes back to normal. So,
Mhm.
I think that hysteria is a human quality that is defies like sort of rational economic actor, but is absolutely true. And I think you can see that in all sorts of consumer products.
Wow. I guess like your generation also has its equivalent of a labubu.
Oh
That's just
yeah.
ridiculous. Maybe
Or how
I
about
should.
like, have you ever heard of Cabbage Patch Kids?
No. What is that?
Cabbage Patch Kids were like in the mid 1980s, like 1983 was like the hottest thing ever. And on the nightly news, this was before 24-hour news cycle, but on the nightly news, they would
Yeah.
literally show people in Toys R Us stores punching each other trying to take Cabbage Patch Kids. It was the same thing as Labubu. So I mean, in some ways, it's like we don't get it. Progress never occurs with the consumer. It's just the next fad. So
Mm, yeah.
yeah, no different.
Well, as the history major that you once were, like I think you're like presenting like a cyclical nature human history, which I think is fascinating how it manifests itself on the consumer market for sure.
For sure. I mean, to your point, it is pattern recognition. I
Mhm.
guess I have going for me is I've seen a lot of patterns as a merchant for a long time, and then as an investor. So it
Yeah.
is interesting seeing how the same thing happens over and over again. Um,
Mm.
but it is also important knowing like these specific examples we're talking about again were things that were successful. There's a lot of ridiculous stuff out there that people have tried to sell. I mean, 30,000 consumer brands are launched every year. Not many
Yeah.
of them are successful. So if you're trying to maximize your success rate, I think staying away from pet rocks is probably a good idea.
Yeah, that's great. And I hope most of the founders out there are not trying to make the next Labubu or the next like Pet Rock. Kind of wrapping up on the founder story versus like product quality type of discussion. Like, what are the key things that you think make a good story in relations to like, the transportation and everything we talked about,
Yeah.
but also correctly representing the product quality?
So your question is what is the most important things for conveying product quality or
Yeah.
conveying the story you're saying?
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, I think a number one is authenticity in like the founder story, authenticity of like why the product matters, why people should care about it. Absolutely. I think you know it's not that's not a perfect answer because you're right, there are things like Labubu that no matter how good the founder story is, like it has nothing to do with that. But I think if you're trying to be a rational investor in consumer products, you'd have to be a pretty rare investor to recognize that Labubu is going to become the phenomenon that it actually became. That's part of why Ocampo Capital doesn't invest in things like Labubu. That is not something I feel comfortable trying to take a risk on.
That's great. That's great. And I guess the follow up to that is, what are your advice for founders? So how should they approach making a good brand story, especially the ones who, have really good product, or like has put a lot of effort on research to make sure that their product, whatever it is, works.
That's a great question, and we deal with that all the time, as you know, with Ocampo Capital. I mean, I think the biggest thing is how thinking about who your consumer is and how do you articulate the value of your product to that person. So if your consumer is, a mom in Kansas City and you're trying to convey to them like hardcore science, that's very hard to do. If you can convey it in terms that your audience can digest and understand and appreciate, you will win. That's the most important thing. Is you got to put yourself in the shoes of your consumer. Um, you can't fall in love with the product assuming that the consumer is going to figure it out because oftentimes they won't, particularly if it's really really complicated technology. You have to find a way to convey the value of the product in words and in terms that are valuable to consumer. Because at the end of the day, consumer is king. The consumer is going to determine if you win or lose, not the technology.
I see. I lied. I have one more follow-up.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, does that mean you are like you want to identify your consumer and then understanding what would be a language that they speak to, convey the messaging of your products? I see two potential challenges with that. The first one is that there's always like kind of a latent consumer group out there. They didn't realize that they have the need, or like, at the first glance, like the founders didn't think that, I don't think like my Chinese medicine is gonna serve athletes. I
Mhm.
didn't think acupuncture, could be like something that Western athletes could need. It's more so like appealing to like, oh, actually I'm like I don't know what the full extent of like acupuncture as a service and its market history is, but let's just say that it was, specifically for people who are more familiar with like Chinese medicine. So there's this latent group. Maybe like these consumers did their own research and found out about it. And to target this type of consumer, they have to like expand their narrative to like also
Yep.
speak to more people like them to tap into the untapped. And then on the other side is that what if you just don't have the knowledge of consumers that you're trying to appeal to? Like, let's say that, oh, I have this really cool supplement that is also let's continue the Chinese medicine example. Like it
Yeah.
looks really, really weird. It's like a weird root of a plant in a jar. I'm thinking about ginseng drink. You know that mom postpartum or other people who had this type of health need would love this product. But as a founder that has more, language that's in a different context, you're unable to like communicate with them. Or like you just simply don't know these people enough.
I think you have to know who your core consumer is you're going after. You have to know who that initial primary consumer is, and have a pretty good sense that you're right on that. You may have secondary consumers or tertiary consumers that you've not thought of that may end up becoming, fans of your product. And as long as you establish your brand in a way that you're not going to um, you know disenfranchise those consumers, you will, that'll be just like gravy. That'll be additional benefit to your sales. But I think if you don't know who your primary consumer is, you're in trouble as a new brand. It's really, really hard to be successful selling product when you don't know who you're selling it to and don't know who your primary product is. So their primary consumer is. So that's just absolutely, I think, imperative as an investor and as a company founder, is knowing who your primary audience is and who your primary consumer is.
I see. And then you worry about the rest later.
I think so. Yeah, or at least you set it, you structure it such that you can add to those consumers later, but they're not the primary people you're going after.
I see.
So, yeah,
That makes sense.
cool. Well, probably should conclude here, but Athena, as always, really enjoyed chatting with you, and hopefully the audience does as well. I would say, just to wrap it up, if there were any kind of key takeaways I would take from this episode, is that you need both the product and you need the story. So said differently, you need the rocket and the rocket fuel. I think we'd also both agree that, like, if you're leading with rocket fuel, that can be a real problem. Wartime propaganda campaign, or a hype machine, or inauthentic storytelling. That is a problem when you're leading with rocket fuel. Now, it's also a problem if you only have the rocket. This may be the most beautiful looking rocket ever, but without the rocket fuel, it's not going to go very far. And so you do need both, and you need to figure out how to package that together in a way that's a winning strategy. So, and I would say that this was true, kind of going back over history. This was true with newspaper advertisements in the 1800s. This was true with radio ads in the first half of the 20th century. This is true with TV ads in the second half of the 20th century. And it was true, with social. It's still true with social media today, that you really need both. We'll leave it there. But hope you all enjoyed this. Please let us know your thoughts and your feedback. And if you have any ideas for topics you'd like us to hit on later, I'm happy to do that. Although we already have a bunch prepared. So thank you very much for paying attention and being part of this. And until next time, hope all is well. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.